our speaker for the evening. He doesn't need an introduction, he needs a presentation. Let me take just a minute to say how we go about getting our programs for the year. Once a year we have an open forum for anybody to come and make suggestions as to what they would think would be a good program for the organization. Twice Bob and Dana Whitfield have hosted this meeting in their homes, and people have come and offered suggestions or names of speakers they think that would be good for and interesting for us here at the Historical Society. At this year's meeting, one of the suggestions was, tell us about the copper mining in Lumpkin County and the copper mine community that was over there off Copper Mine Road. So that is the topic for tonight. One of the suggestions from you as a member that we have that as our topic. Our presenter tonight is our president, beginning his third year as president of our organization. Chris Worick is retired military, came to live in Dahlonega, very interested in history and research. He got connected with Ann Amerson, who became his mentor, and he has done an awful lot of research in the area, can tell you where all the gold mines are located, and to stay off the property where they are, because you'd be trespassing. But he can tell you where they are. And he has authored a book on Free Jim, an African-American who was an entrepreneur here in town and had a gold mine and a store, and made a very interesting book, and it was presented to us a couple of months ago as he revised it. Chris also has written a children's history book about gold mining here in town, and it has puzzles and games and things to color in there for children to use when they're riding home after they've been to Dahlonega for a visit. And we sell those at the Chamber of Commerce and at the old jail. Chris is quite an author and has written a number of articles for the Dahlonega Nugget about what's in a name, how the street names got presented, named here in the Dahlonega area, and where the names came from, who the people were named after. And he's such an outstanding person that he was named Grand Marshal of the Gold Rush Parade this year. A little aside, there are pigeons roosting down at the Chestatee Diving Bell. And Chris and Manny go down there a few times a year and clean off the poo. So he doesn't get credit for that. But he does it. So it's my pleasure tonight to present to you our president, Chris Worick, who's going to tell us about gold mining in Lumpkin County. Copper mining? Oh. All right. If you rather, thank you.
That great introduction, Larry. Every word true. You know, that last actually is what I probably would like to avoid hearing again. But it's true that we do have to keep the diving bell cleaned off from time to time because they haven't solved the problem with the pigeons that tend to roost up there after they're shooting things to get them out of there. So keep the metal from getting all rusty. Before we get started, I brought in these rocks over here that we'll talk a little bit about in the program. And when you look at these, they don't look like something that you'd normally find. There's a reason for that. It's because typically these are the type of rocks that prospectors used in the 19th century to help them locate buried or underground deposits of metallic ore. In this case, copper, but also gold might be an indicator, possibly silver and things like that. So I thought this was very interesting to bring those in because you might have these laying around in your backyard and not even know it. Maybe there's a buried, copper or gold deposit there that you haven't seen before. So I brought those in just for some physical evidence and examples of these type of rocks, which you'll see it's called Gossan type rocks. And as you can see, they come in different types of forms, but they're very interesting. What got me started with this was not long ago, I had been researching a lot of the different areas of the copper mine or gold mine, but I noticed that during the 1850s when I was doing my research, all of a sudden there's this copper mania, for lack of a better term, and even in some of the newspapers they talked about this as copper mania that hit the North Georgia area. So I said, okay, well, what was this all about? So as I started putting some of the pieces together, I'm noticing that there were, not a lot, but there were a substantial amount of recorded articles about certain areas of the county where copper was being found. I thought, well, that's very interesting. The one bad part about this is that when it was being found in the 1850s, it's one of those time periods for the research that I use with a lot of the old newspaper articles that we don't have a lot of documentation of. Where the documentation I got that specifically pertained to Lumpkin County, it was being recorded or transferred to other newspapers around the state. So when I was doing online research for the Savannah newspaper, Milledgeville, and so forth, you know, Dahlonega, just like other newspapers, would share that information with other towns. And so that's how I was able to get these little snippets of articles. But for how these mines progressed and so forth during the 1850s, like on a weekly basis, which would have been reported here, we don't really know exactly what was going on. So as we go into this, it's kind of like there's some areas or time frames that I'm not quite sure about what was going on with that. Okay, next slide. Okay, why was copper important? Or why would people want to mine copper in the first place when gold was the prevalent mineral of choice in this area? Well, going back to biblical times and even before that, copper was one of the very first metals that humans had used in order to, you know, create new things, weapons, jewelry, in this case, the different properties of copper, as we know now. Good electrical conductor, thermal conductor, is corrosion resistant, it's easily joined, ductile, it's tough, it's non-magnetic, it's attractive color, and it's easy to alloy with other metals to create other things. Next. Alloys of copper. In this case, man found that if you could take copper and zinc, you could create brass. And same thing if you take copper and tin or arsenic, you could create bronze, which was a little bit harder. The bad thing about copper, although it's valuable, but not as valuable as, say, gold or silver, is that it's really a good metal to work with for different things. Although it's very soft, in the case of like where you would make brass or bronze, it doesn't hold an edge as well there because of its softness there. So that's why they found out that, okay, it's a good metal, it's a good base metal to work with as long as you got enough of it. That's one of the problems. You have to have enough of it in order to make a good amount of articles with it, tools, weapons, and what have you. Okay, different uses for copper, and I'm sure you probably would be able to name some other ones. Coins, jewelry, tools, electrical wiring, decoration, wooden sailing vessel sheathing, roofing material, and plumbing. This was something I found that during the 19th century, when we still had wooden sailing vessels, that it was not uncommon that they would take large sheets, thin sheets of copper, and use these on the hulls of wooden sailing ships. Why? It prevented rot from the wood, prevented water from coming in, and it also helped to make the ship go faster in the water. So they would actually take these sheets and nail them or attach them to the outer edge of the hull of the ship to keep articles and stuff from getting attached to them on the wood and so forth right there. So also, I couldn't, there we go, especially use of copper in Appalachia. Why was copper important? As you know, this was a booming industry. Probably in some cases around here it might still be going on, but copper is also very good for making a lot of moonshine apparatus. Some of you, or maybe some of your relatives might know about this, I don't know. This is one of the indicators of copper, okay, as I told you about these rocks right here. This is called Gossan. Now, basically, what is Gossan? Has anybody ever heard about this before? Ever heard this term before? Most people haven't. I didn't know what this was until we found these rocks. I had to go home and start looking on the internet to figure out what this was. But they all look pretty much the same like we found right there. In this case, you'll see the green oxidation. That's actually evidence of copper on these outlying outcrops of rocks right there. Now, none of these photographs right here, unfortunately, are from around here. They're taken in other parts of the world, but I wanted to show you, as an example, what Gossan looks like in a large quantity, and so that way you'll be able to get an idea about what this stuff would look like when copper would be present. Next. Gossan, or in German Eisenerhut or Eisenhut, is intensively oxidized, weathered, or decomposed rock, usually the upper and exposed part of an ore deposit or mineral vein. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Gossans were important guides to buried ore deposits. So basically, this is your guide for buried treasure, used by prospectors in their quest for metal ore. So before they had metal detectors, this would be an indicator that there might be something right there to look for underneath the ground. An experienced prospector could read the clues in the structure of Gossans to determine the type of mineralization likely found below the iron cap, or what's exposed on the surface. I thought this was very interesting because for the longest time, when you see a lot of these gold mines out in the middle of nowhere, you wonder, how in the world did these guys ever figure out, I got to dig right here, what was on the surface, because we don't have the benefit or the hindsight of being able to go back, 100, 150 years to see what everything actually looked like before they kind of destroyed it with the mining. Was there some type of rock right there, was actually gold right there on the surface or what? So this was actually pretty interesting for me because now I can tell that if I go out in the woods and I start finding something, this Gossan rock right there, I might be in the right area, that there's something that maybe one of these guys might have missed and I could win the lotto by myself instead of worrying about the Powerball thing there. Okay, next. Okay, without knowing all these different chemical formulas, man, he's a retired chemist. This is an example of what Gossan would look like, okay, as far as over a buried mineral deposit. Okay, this is the stuff that's on the surface that's getting exposed over time. It's being eroded. Okay, so basically that's what these rocks are. They're just eroded. All the minerals that basically left the rock. As an example, my metal detector did not pick up any of these rocks. And when you look at them up close, it looks almost like slag from a copper mine or something that's been highly heated and melted almost. But there's nothing metallic in it that picks up on the metal detector. Underneath the Gossan, you have a leach zone. And under that, then you get to the oxide zone, you'll notice that's where you have your native copper at. And then other minerals there, cuprite, azurite, malachite, and then as you get down a little bit further, chalcopyrite down the primary mineralization road. Pyrite is important later on, as we will talk about this when we start talking about the actual copper mine that everybody's familiar about up on the river. Okay, next. Okay, here's some other examples of Gossan outcroppings in different parts of the world. This one I thought was fascinating. This is actually taken in Brazil. Looks like it's pretty much high on a mountain peak somewhere because you can see how it kind of just drops off there. But there's a lot of copper oxidation, that green stuff right there on the Gossan rocks. And here's some other ones with copper mineralization, and this one actually has traces of copper and gold mixed in with it. So it's not uncommon that where you find Gossan, you might have more than one type of mineral in that area, and that's reflected in some of these newspaper accounts that I found for this area that they found copper, but also they might have found gold in there also. Copper in the United States has been found and actually mined going back to the 1700s. Up in New England, in New Hampshire, and Connecticut, and New Jersey, and Delaware. Those were actually some of the first copper mines in the United States in the 1700s. Very crude, obviously, because the extraction process for copper is a little bit different than gold, because you actually have to change the chemical compound of it. What kind of started it here in this area was in the 1840s, when Michigan, after it became a state, up on the very northern part of the Keweenaw Peninsula up there, on Lake Superior, a large deposit, and even today, a large deposit of copper was found up there. Now, this was known by the Native Americans for centuries. Who knows, maybe longer than that, because a lot of the copper that people will find that were traded by the Native Americans and turned into jewelry and ornamental artifacts and things like that probably came from up there in the northern part of Michigan centuries ago. And as they traded, it eventually worked its way around to different parts of the country right there. But in the 1840s, that's what kind of started to have a slight interest in copper in the country. Why? Number one, same thing with gold. The United States, even though it was still a young nation, it didn't have a lot of its own natural resources. And so what they had to do for gold and silver before it was found in different parts of the United States was that they had to barter and get this stuff from other countries, typically South America, Central America, even over in Europe, in exchange for, say, like timber, because that was one of the natural resources that we had in the colonies and later in the United States for building ships. But once we found gold and silver, and then later with this copper right there, it helps us to become more self-sufficient. And so there's a big interest in this to be able to use it for other things besides coins and jewelry and things like that. It has practical purposes. Next. This was interesting because I'm going to show you a comparison. This is from the 1918 report on, or I'm sorry, the 1909 report on the gold deposits of Georgia. And you see Lumpkin County is right here in the gold belt, and you'll see how everybody pretty much knows the gold belt runs up into North Carolina and all the way up into Virginia and then down into Alabama. So basically northeast to southwest in that direction. And the dark lines and spots show where the gold deposits were recorded as of 1909, what we're known to be at. Next slide. This is the copper deposits, or pyrite deposits, which were recorded in 1918 of North Georgia. It's a lot less, obviously, than the gold right here, but as you see all these little spots in the different counties around the state up here in North Georgia, it still runs in the same direction. Right here is Lumpkin County, and we're almost smack dab just in the southern part of it where this belt is called the Creighton-Dahlonega belt ran through the state right there. And if you overlap this with the gold belt, it's almost either parallel or it's in the same line. It's either parallel or directly over the gold belt. So you see where these minerals are kind of all intermixed. So that's what I thought was interesting when I mentioned that if we can get Dr. Witherspoon to come and do a presentation about why gold is found here, he can also include copper with that in his presentation in geological terms about why it was formed right here. But it actually ran all the way down, just like it did with the gold, into Alabama. But there's a larger deposit down here in Haralson and even in Carroll County. There's a lot more copper being found down there than there was gold for some reason. So it was interesting. But what started it down here in this area, the interest was the Ducktown copper mining industry in Tennessee. That was founded in actually 1843, but it really wasn't developed until a few years later, about 1847, 1848. And then it took off. So copper in this region, that's where it kind of got started at. And so people started paying attention to it. So by the 1850s, this is what we have in Lumpkin County. The little red dots indicated known copper mines or deposits that were worked in this time frame. Next. This is a recorded listing from newspaper accounts and then that report that we just saw from 1918 of known copper mining activity that occurred in Lumpkin County over the years. Basically, it started about 1854. That was the first known recorded copper mine that was found here in the county. And then it pretty much ran almost to about the 1890s, so a very small window, and it wasn't consistent. It was off and on. And these were the different places where they were finding that, and it's not really consistent except for when you look at the Boleyfield line and the Welchel and Company, you'll see Land Lot 101 keep coming up all the time. Why? It's because Land Lot 101, which actually borders on the Chesapeake, that actually became the pyrite mine later on. But that was one of the first ones which was discovered in 1854 and 1856. These are the first mines that were discovered right there based on these newspaper accounts. And obviously when they talk about the newspaper accounts in terms of gold and copper, they always give these big glowing reports about, oh, it's all inexhaustible, there's no end to it, and so forth right there. Well, typically by the next week, then what you have is that, well, it ran out, and so it wasn't as big as we thought it was. But it's still interesting to note how many different places around the county where copper was being discovered. This is one of the first accounts right there, gold and copper mines in Lumpkin County, April 12, 1854. And the guy who was just a traveler has it signed down here. And he was going through the county and talked about several mining companies that have recently commenced operations in the vicinity. New York company on Cane Creek, 2 miles from this place, at the Etowah Gold Mine, The Mooresville copper mine, some 7 miles northeast from Dahlonega, is evidently one of the more promising characters. This vein, which is finally developed, is within the past 2 weeks been principally leased and brought up by Misters, it should say Moore, not Mauer, or Mower, it should say Moore. Moore, Stevenson and Company are now making preparations to get the ore out on a large scale. Matthew Stevenson, that was one of the people that was on there, and then the Moore was actually Robert H. Moore, who was a well-known gold mining entrepreneur and owner in this area. And a couple more from 1854. Again, we got Moore, Stevenson and Company. This one was from June 13th, so this was just a couple of months later. Another one, the mine of Welchel and Company, which we alluded to in a late number, now considered fully developed, having gone on the vein, the rise 20 feet and exhibits a richness equal to Ducktown. Again, richness equal to Ducktown. These great glowing reports about how they think that this mine is going to have this unlimited amount of copper. But then they also go on to say, the last one, it says, they're convinced that the calendar of copper mines of the United States, the mines of Lumpkin County, are now to be considered as among the best, and no mistake. Then we talk about some more copper mining right there in different places. This one talks about some of the other counties. Gordon, Lumpkin, Murray, Whitfield counties have also discovered copper there, besides the one here. This is also 1854. So as you see, 1854. And now these were from our newspapers here because we don't have any newspapers available, either real newspapers, digitized, microfilm, whatever. These are all excerpts that I found while scanning newspapers online from Milledgeville, Athens, and so on right there. So you're getting these snapshots about what was going on. That's why I said it's bad, because if we had something week to week from our own newspapers here, we could see how these mines actually were being developed and maybe even how much was being taken out of it. That's some of the questions that we have. We don't really know how much copper totally was ever found in any of these mines because it was never really recorded. Where were all these shafts that might have been dug at? Who actually, we could tell kind of who owned the mines from the deed records, but it doesn't really go into, say, a lot of detail about that right there. So there's a lot of questions about how extensive was the copper mining that was going on right here. Now here's a map of the Boleyfields copper mines. A lot of people might be familiar with the Boleyfield gold mine, which is on the Chestatee River. But that wasn't discovered until 1858. This was 1854. So Mr. Bowling Fields, who owned the property right here, lot number 100, close to the river, he actually had a copper mine first that was discovered. And now what was interesting was in the pictures that you'll see just coming up here in a little bit, this was the area that we were looking extensively, Mandy and myself, within the past week of where these mines were at, because I got a detailed report that says specifically on land lot 109, which is right here, that there was at least 3 different shafts and some pits that were dug right there. Now we found these pits, as you'll see in some of these pictures right there, but as you see today, it's right in the middle of a subdivision. So somebody might have a house built over a mine shaft and not even really know it right there. But the interesting thing was that the copper lead right here, here's Long Branch, the stream itself, but the road where it shows the lead in the direction of the copper, Long Branch Road is almost directly in line, if not over that lead right there. So it's very possible that the road was built and covered it up. That's the bad thing about today. A lot of these copper mining areas have either been obliterated or they're in somebody's backyard. They don't even know what's back there. Here's a close-up of it. 101. This was the one that talked about Welchel and Company. I guess it's supposed to be Wilkie up here as far as the owner of the property. 101, that's where the pyrite mine is at, the Chestatee Pyrite Mine today. So that's what it was originally, about 101, by that Welchel and Company that was prospecting that. And then the Boleyfield mines, they were probably renting the rest of these properties right here. Incidentally, it talked about that. This was the longest stretch of the copper mining area in the county. The other ones were just small bits and pieces scattered about. But this one ran basically from what it said about a 2.5-mile stretch, and it kind of ended down here between lot 114 and 119. Right here today, up in this corner, this is actually almost like Long Branch Road and Highway 52. This right here would be where Long Branch Elementary School is today. So it almost kind of ends up right there in the backyard. Here's another map of the Chestatee copper mines, and as I said, this shows the copper lode, or the direction of where they determined where the copper was running at. It doesn't say how wide or how deep it is in the ground, but what was interesting was that they did record on a different map, this is land lot 109, where we were looking for these copper mine tunnels or pits and so forth. And then down here, where it says letter E, this is where I found just within the last couple of days some copper mining tunnels, which are covered up now, but I found them at the bottom of the hill from where I found one of those rocks at, which was just south of Long Branch Elementary School. This was the side view of what the mine on land lot 109 was. Now, when we see these pictures, you can kind of tell that maybe they're holes that are filled in, and this is what they originally looked like. And this is the stuff that's like kind of in somebody's backyard. But they had some extensive work going on right here. This is a 75-foot shaft, the longest one right here. So 75-foot vertical shaft, and then as you see on the scale right there, it's about 100 feet or so in length, and then back up on the other side. We never did find these. I'm sure they're probably out there, but over time, these things have been forgotten about. Maybe for safety purposes, they've been covered up. but there's still some evidence that there was actual mining going on out there in the woods if you know just what to look for. Some of the stuff that confuses us because we didn't know exactly what we're looking at, but we knew that some of these things are actually man-made. It also gave rise to 3 different copper mining companies just in Lumpkin County. There were other copper mines that were formed in the state, but these ones specifically were operated out of Lumpkin County. Georgia White Path Gold and Copper Mining Company, 1855, President J.J. Field. Capital stock $500,000, so they had high greens right there, and their office was in Dahlonega. Springer Mountain Gold and Copper Mining Company. Now, this is not the Springer Mountain that most people would associate with the Appalachian Trail. This was a different one. But Ezekiel Spriggs, Zion Spriggs, and John L. Summerhour and their associates are the ones who started this company. This one was actually where Manny and Russell and myself had originally gone to, up on Winding Stair Gap Road. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. How these guys found anything of copper in there, I have no idea. It must have just been somebody was hunting one day and ran across something like this and brought it back into town and said, hey, I found this out there, 10 miles from town. Because it was not too far off of Cooper Gap Road out in that area, but it was just so far out there, I have no idea how they would have found that. Not to mention it's so far off the beaten path when it comes to like the copper, even the gold belt. So that was really lucky find for them to find that out there. And the last one was this Turner Mountain Copper Mining Company, William Rutherford and James Payton. Again, $500,000. So these guys, they had some pretty good ideas that they were going to make some money out of this stuff. Okay, let me back up for a second. One of the things I couldn't figure out, and again, this is because we have a lack of newspapers, but I kind of mentioned this earlier, was that the process to extract copper from ore is different than what gold would be. We had a lot of gold mills, stamp mills, and so forth around the county. The process was pretty straightforward, where you can pulverize the gold-bearing ore with the stamps, then the gold would be freed from the quartz, and it would flow over a plate that had mercury on it, and the mercury would trap the gold, and then they would put that in a retort, which would be burned off. The mercury vapors would be burned off, and then you just leave the gold. Pretty simple. Copper is somewhat different, okay? There's basically 2 kinds of copper. You have native copper, which is just, copper by itself, which doesn't require a lot to be able to work it into something, and then copper ore. Now, copper ore, it's basically little pieces of copper which is trapped inside of different rock forms or minerals. Tell me if I'm wrong. Okay. And this stuff requires a little bit different process. You still have to crush it in order to try to free the copper from the other minerals. But then it's also, you have to change the chemical composition. Typically, the copper ore, which they found, it did not contain a lot of copper. In order to get a profit out of this, you had to get a lot of copper-bearing ore, and then it would have to be sent someplace. So as far as I know, there was not any furnaces or mills that are up here in this area. It sounds like that they had to take the ore and transport it someplace else by wagon to either Atlanta, maybe Gainesville, or maybe even to Ducktown, I don't know, to actually refine this stuff in order to have your end product, which would have been, the copper that they needed right there. So again, even today, we still don't have a railroad up here. The closest one today is Gainesville. In the 1850s, the closest railroad might have been Atlanta. Gainesville didn't have a railroad really until the 1870s, and so they still had a long haul in order to get that ore out of here. So that would require a lot of wagons in order to transport this stuff out of here. So it also requires a lot of money. So the copper mining, from the history I was able to put together, this quick timeline, basically in the 1850s it was going pretty good, just like the gold mining was. And by the time the 1860s roll around, the Civil War begins. Okay, so essentially, once the war begins and then ends in 1865, nothing in any type of mining form, gold or copper in this case, really went on until about the 1870s, because people needed money in order to do this. But by the 1870s, you see this resurgence of people having an interest, new people coming down from up north that have some money to invest in this, and so on. So by the 1870s, you see a gradual pickup of this copper mining industry again, and you get sporadic, articles talking about it in the 1870s and into the 1880s. By the 1890s, what happens is that the price of the price of copper drops significantly, and so it's not worth, you're not really going to get a profit out of doing it, so a lot of that interest in copper mining drops off. However, what transitions or becomes profitable is pyrite mining. And pyrites has, help me out, Manny, it has sulfuric acid or sulfur in it. And so the price of sulfuric acid, or it goes up because now they use it in the manufacture of fertilizer, and also later on sulfuric acid becomes very important around World War I for the production of ammunition. They need that for ammunition. And so what happens with the Chestatee copper mine is that they find that there's a large deposit of pyrites in the copper mine. They still call it the copper mine, maybe because it had been mined for copper for so many years. But it actually becomes a pyrite mine in 1895, and copper is basically kind of forgotten about by this time. It never really resumed. But what happens is with the pyrite mine, it becomes so important because prior to World War I, a lot of this pyrite that was being imported into the United States was coming from Europe. And so the only other really large pyrite deposit that was being mined actively in the United States was up in Pennsylvania. And so by the time World War I rolls around, people are starting to think, hey, we might need this sulfuric acid. We got to find some pyrite deposits. Well, this Dr. Pratt, who was a geologist that came out of Atlanta, had done a survey. He owned this mine up there, the copper mine, and figured out that all these pyrites could be mined, efficiently, if we have a railroad up here. And so that's where the railroad by 1917 comes around. As early as 1895, they're talking about trying to build a railroad because they realize the importance of this pyrite to be able to use this for sulfuric acid, and, for making fertilizer and so on right there. But we have no way to get it to the railroad except for wagons, which is very, cumbersome, slow, and, it's kind of primitive. So that's where the idea about building the spur line railroad from Gainesville over to Claremont and then up to the copper mines comes from. So as early as 1895. Unfortunately, fast forwarding to 1917, when the United States gets into World War I, okay, the pyrite mine becomes a national interest, okay? The people that were working there were exempt from the draft. Even all the soldiers that were going off to fight in World War I, this was considered so important to the United States national interest that people weren't able to, be in the draft if they were working at the mine right there. They were exempted from that. And I do believe, I read someplace that they tried to not advertise it as being a pyrite mine because they didn't want some German saboteurs coming over here and blowing it up. They kept referring to it as a copper mine right there. The unfortunate thing was by the time the railroad actually finished and got running, the war was over. The armistice had been signed. And so the railroad continued to run for a short period of time because, the pyrite, they were still using it for the manufacture of fertilizer. But the mine itself, it eventually lost, interest. So they were mining gravel up until about the late 1920s out of the mine right there. That was the last real use of the copper pyrite mine on the Chestatee River. And so it's not really copper, but the interesting thing about the pyrite mine was that it was, besides consolidated, this is probably the largest complex, industrial complex in Lumpkin County for a short period of time. Anybody that's familiar with the history of the area knows that a small city basically sprung up around the mine that was known as Chestatee. It had a post office, had a school, had a store for its employees, and so forth. And this one obviously was taken once the railroad got started, because you can see the ore cars right there that's loading up some of the ore from the mine itself. So it was a big complex at one time, although short-lived. And these pictures I found on the Vanishing Georgia website, this just shows different aspects of the mines where you got this conveyor belt, either hauling or, coming down to get the ore out. You got a couple guys working on the side of the hill right there. Next. Got a guy working down inside the mine with a drill, probably an air compressor drill to try to extract some of the pyrite. And just some other pictures right here. Some people know the bridge that's still over there across the river. And here's another one of these conveyor belts that goes up into one of the shafts, down into one of the shafts. But unfortunately, we don't have any actual photographs of the copper mining activities itself. We've got some photographs of gold mining, obviously, because that was the flavor of the week around here. But when it comes to copper mining, don't really have anything. So this is what we had to go on from our newspaper accounts and our maps and so on. So our merry band of adventurers, Manny, myself, and Russ, we went up to, like I said, Winding Stair Gap. And it's a hike up there. That terrain up there is pretty intense. And after hunting around, we finally found these Gossan outcroppings right here. And this area, it's hard to see where the folds in the ground are, but there was a pit And this is what clued us in that we were in the right area. That people always leave these pits behind. That's one thing that they don't, really cover up, which is a good thing. So you got some kind of physical evidence that somebody had been working there before. And so in this pit that we were working in, we were finding all these other pieces of gazan and other type of rocks, that look like they're like tailing piles almost from a worked mine. There was supposed to be, according to the 1918 survey that I read, there was supposed to be about an 80-foot long tunnel, which was dug in there, and there was like a big rock that was supposed to be where the tunnel entrance was. Well, there's a lot of big rocks up there. But we never did find the mine entrance, but we knew we were in the right area right here. This was an interesting comparison. Coming back over to the Long Branch area, we saw the Bowleyfield mine map from 1854, and this is how it looks today. You'll notice where the lead is and so forth, it almost mirrors Long Branch Road. And as we zoom in closer, here's land lot 109, where the report showed that in 1854 they had dug the tunnels and so forth. And then 101 up here, this is where the Chestatee copper pyrite mine would have been located at. But this was a particular interest right here because we knew on land lot 109 that there was some type of activity that had been going on. So with that in mind, not really knowing exactly what we're going to find, I told Manny, I said, let's go over there and check this out. Maybe we'll find something. And probably within just, 2 minutes? Yeah, 2 minutes. When we turned off of Long Branch Road onto this Copper Ridge Drive, and then you've got Riverview Trail east and west, just take the right onto Riverview Trail east, and literally right to the right-hand side of the road, maybe like 20 feet off the road, there's this huge pit in the ground. It's like X marks the spot. You can't get too far off from that. And so we started exploring that. We said, okay, well, here's one. Where there's one, there's probably more. Not to mention, we did find a few of those gazan rocks that were below the pit going down the hill in that same area right there. So this was our area of concentration because using the map and trying to use deductive reasoning where it said, this tunnel was at, we figured it must be in the right area right here. So that was the area we kind of focused in on. So this was the pit that was located next to Riverview Trail East, if anybody's interested in seeing it. Now, it doesn't drop off as the picture might assume. It actually just kind of forms like a giant cone. So Manny jumped down in there, and I had to take his picture, trying to get some depth to it. That's the hard thing when you're out there in the woods, is trying to get pictures of these depressions and holes in the ground. It's hard to really get an appreciation for how deep these things are. So this is when we got to the bottom of the pit there, and I was hoping he wasn't going to fall in there. That was just covering something. All of a sudden, the whole ground just collapses on him. But not far from the pit itself, there's this other, it almost looks like a tunnel entrance which has been filled in because it's got that typical shape where it kind of goes down like a entrance, basically. And this has been kind of covered up. But obviously it's old because these trees have grown up through it right there. And then down at the very bottom off the road, there's a stream that kind of runs through the area. Now, across the road, as we kept going on down a little bit further, along Riverview Trail, at least it kind of snakes through there. And what I've kind of figured out is that where the mining area was at, they built this subdivision through there and typically tended to avoid these areas where there might be something in there because these things are built like literally in people's backyards. But this was very interesting because the stream, it was almost like 3 canals of a sort were built side by side, and then there was man-made rocks that were piled up, or not man-made rocks, but man-made, walls, basically, that had been piled up in these canals, cut because they were so straight right there. There's no doubt that somebody made these on purpose for a reason. What they did with it, I don't know. It might have been that they were trying to determine how wide this copper vein might have been, how deep it was, where it ran, something like that, because these things are like right next to each other. And then, you can see it right here, this overgrown wall. It was almost like a horseshoe shape right here with these 2 huge trees that had grown up right through the rocks right there. But as you can see, they're kind of stacked up. And then this falls back this way into one of those canals that I was referring to. So, again, I don't really know what this would have been used for. I was looking for something more like a furnace, like a big pile of stacked rocks, which would have formed something for smelting or roasting copper ores or something like that. But we did find a large trail of bricks, but they weren't really old bricks that somebody has purposely dumped out there, and so we didn't really figure out what those would have been for, because we thought, well, if it's like a pile of bricks from, say, a chimney or something like this, why wouldn't it be just in one pile? Why are these things so strung out? Don't know. But this was just down by Riverview Trail East again. at the bottom, it kind of snakes through the, where the streams are at. And here's another view from looking up from top of the hill from where that little trench runs from the first pit. And then here's another close-up of some of the rocks that were piled up. So as we got done with this area, we went up to the top of the hill at, was it Sunset Drive? Yeah. Sunset Drive. Because we ran into one of the local people that lived out there and asked him if he had seen anything about copper mines. They don't know anything about that stuff out there. They just know that there might be some holes in the ground. They don't know what it's for. But he told us, he said, oh yeah, we heard some story about back in the 70s there was some cadet that had been rappelling down this 300-foot shaft or something unbelievable and, you know, died in there or something like that. I said, well, where's that at? Well, if you go up on top of that hill, you got to park your car, just keep on walking into the woods. Once you see the cement, what do you say? Cistern, you know, you're in the right area. Okay, so we're looking for something small, you know, like that. We didn't think we'd find something like this. This thing was like 60 foot around, and it's cone shaped. It's made of concrete, and it's cone shaped. It goes down to about 25 to 30 foot deep.
It's 60 feet in diameter,
60 feet
50 feet down. About
50 feet?
375.
It was 50 feet.
About 375,000 gallon capacity.
Yeah, we were doing the measurements. Manny was taking
It was
this
estimated, yes.
picture there.
But close guess.
But it's out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, this is basically overlooking almost where the pyrite line is at. It's really close to it because we can hear the rapids or the shoals from the river from on top of here. But I had no idea what this is for. Even in the old newspaper accounts, which I had read about this, it didn't mention, you know, like some kind of giant holding tank or something like this. I thought maybe it's a reservoir for operating some type of steam-powered machinery. Possible. The only other thing besides the cistern itself was on the far side. As you go down, there was like a small out area where the concrete had been built. There was like a old meter, like a water meter, that was still sticking up out of the ground right there. So maybe to tell somebody how much water was currently inside this thing. I don't know. We never did find anything else there. We kept walking a little bit further down, but there was nothing else man-made down there that we found of any evidence. So
They like my hat.
History's mysteries. We thought if the zombie apocalypse comes with all the zombies. Okay, land lot 114. This is where I went myself the other day because it had been kind of nagging at me when I had read the report about this thing was supposed to terminate, the copper lode was supposed to terminate at the corner of land lot 119 and 114. So I was kind of curious about where it was at. So I went out there on my own the other day and started walking around, and lo and behold, this is what you find. There was 3 successive copper mine tunnels, not very deep because there's not that much dirt that has been pushed out of there, but they're all facing uphill, and they're all like within 50 yards of each other, very close. So I don't know if these were exploratory tunnels that they were using to try to figure out how wide the vein was or if there's actually copper there. But as you can see, they've been filled in pretty good over time right there. So, you know, there's no chance to get in there unless you really dig them out, which take a lot of time.
Well, did the shaft go down real steeply from the entrance?
It goes downhill in order to drain water and so forth, but as it goes down, you can see how it's kind of got that kind of like depression shape right there.
The shaft itself, did it go down?
I couldn't really tell.
It looks like it's right on top of the ground, you know?
You know, and the funny thing was that I had originally walked from Long Branch Elementary, and I was on top of the ridge up here, and that's where I found some of these Gaussian rocks, so I knew I was kind of in the right area. But I kept looking around because I didn't see any evidence on the ridge of mining. The only way I found it was looking down. I could see this right here sticking out, and so once I got down here, then I could actually look left and right and see that there was actually tunnels that were down there. So you can't see it from the top; you can see it from the bottom. But I couldn't see actually when you get up inside the actual entrance right there because it's all pretty much filled in, so I can't tell if it goes down at an angle or shoots back or whatever.
Could I say something
Yeah.
about that? Because I used to be a copper miner, not here, but other places, and a lot of this is ringing true to me of what I knew 40 years ago. That looks very much like an adit, a horizontal tunnel.
Probably is.
Which people used to use back in that period. Much more than a vertical shaft, because you can get in and get out very easily. You don't have to have complex machinery. You can use just carts, wheelbarrows, anything you like to get stuff in and out.
Right.
And if those tunnels are going in the direction of an uprising slope, that's absolutely typical of what would happen. People would sort of they'd work out approximately how deep underground they want to be. They would find a spot at that level down the slope of the hill and then go in It's so much easier to dig a horizontal tunnel than a vertical shaft.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned the wheelbarrows because on all these, they all have the same type of signature as it goes out. There's like a platform at the very end where you kind of picture that somebody's taking a wheelbarrow and dumping these loads of dirt, which the amounts of dirt or the tailings, the spoil, it was not that large. So I don't think that they actually explored very deep in there because I would expect to find more rocks and more dirt piled up. The bad thing was I was running out of light. Daylight at this time, so I was trying to snap these pictures as quick as I could, so there might very well be more out there that I hadn't seen yet in that area. Thanks.
Chris?
Yes.
The tunnels will means they actually found something. There's ore there. The trenches that you showed earlier means they're exploring. They're looking for the vein.
If they had definitely found something, they would not have done 3 tunnels, because they're going to have to dig a tunnel a fair way into the hillside to get to the ore. And so there's no point in digging 3 close side by side. It's much easier to dig a single at it and then go out sideways from it.
Right.
So I suspect that they were exploring for ore and thinking that there was an ore body down there, and basically hit nothing. And by the time they got to a certain point, they said, blow this for a gang of soldiers and moved away.
No, this was the last one that I found, the 4th actual entrance, or maybe an attic. But this one was different because all 3 of the other ones were running uphill. The entrances were facing up the hill. This one was to the side of it, and it's facing perpendicular, going to the side of the hill. So I didn't know if this was like one where they were trying to go in and figure out, okay, which way was the ore body going? Was it going this direction, or was it going that direction? Where are they pulling this out right there? So I thought that was very interesting because this one was like the odd man out as far as the entrances go right there. But strangely enough, this was in the area. We've always heard these stories about Cherokee trail trees, and believe it or not, this thing is right there. It's pointing the way to the copper. I couldn't believe it. And it's so big, so it must have been put there by the Cherokees. They knew that there was some copper there. They were marking the trail and everything. And that's the end.
Are you going to be doing more exploring?
I hope so, yes, as long as we don't do anything like this. Like I said, I encourage everyone to come here and take a look at these gossip rocks up here, so that way if you see these again, you might know that there might be something there. The one that I have that's a little bit unusual, turn this off. I do actually have a piece of native copper here. Now this one is not from this area. When I was back in high school, we went on family vacation up to northern Michigan, up to the Keweenaw Peninsula, where they did have mining going on up there. And we found this actually in one of the streams that was up there in the mining area. And you can actually see there's a copper nugget on top of this rock right here. This is what native copper would look like in its original state right there. So if you ever find something like this with the signature kind of green color and everything, you're on the right track. But I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. We have a little...
Wait just a moment.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You did a great job. It was very interesting. And to thank you, the Historical Society would like to give you a gift certificate for dinner for 2 at the Corkscrew Bistro Restaurant in town next to the Holiday Theater.